I guess I should start at the beginning. When I was younger, I suffered from bad nightmares. Really bad as in, I would wake up every night screaming, with my bedsheets wet from you-know-what. I assumed at first my parents thought that I would grow out of it. But by the age of 6, with this still continuing, they finally caved in and took me to a professional. However, the professional didn't seem to know what to do, as all his usual advice took no effect. At first, they assumed the professional himself was no good. But with continued failures from everyone they reached out to, they began to blame me. Desperate, they eventually reached out online to see if anyone had any similar experiences or advice. Nothing. They had all but given up when someone reached out to them. My dad told me that the email had no subject, and we were lucky that it didn't end up in spam. It was someone saying that he knew about my disorder, and that it was extremely rare, but he knew how to cure it, except it wouldn't come cheap. Fearing a scam, my parents asked him if he had any details of former clients, and he obliged. All of them basically said the same. Whatever this guy did, it worked perfectly, letting them get full nights of rest again. So, suffice to say, my parents went for it. I don't really remember all too much of the experience, to be honest. Obviously, I was still very young, so my thoughts at the time didn't go far beyond. He looked strange, which, looking back, I can see I wasn't wrong. He was almost homeless looking, yet walked and acted basically like royalty. It's odd to say the least. My dad said he almost changed his mind when the guy arrived, thinking it must be a scam based on the guy alone, but luckily he relented. The man said that he needed it to be just me and him. No distractions, and my parents couldn't be in the room. Obviously nowadays, that's very unlikely, leaving your child alone with a stranger. But back then, things like that weren't exactly as big in the spotlight as they are now, I guess. Luckily, nothing like that actually happened to me, as far as I'm aware. I don't remember all that much of it. I'm not sure, but looking back, I believed what he used may have been a form of hypnosis, hence the memory loss. Then again, I was only 7, so it's possible that I just forgot. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. All I do remember is before he left the room, the man turned to me and spoke in a low voice. Now this bit I do remember. His words have stuck with me all these years. Listen to me. Your family, those around you, they all think there's something wrong with you, a disability or something. You have to remember they are wrong, and they'll never accept it. But you have a gift, my friend. And with that, he was gone. I didn't see him leave, neither did my parents, as my dad later told me, but that it was done. That night, I actually slept. A full, undisturbed night of sleep. As did my parents for the first time since I had been born. No nightmares, no dreams of any sort. Just peace. Obviously, we were all amazed. My parents tried to email the guy to thank him, but strangely, they couldn't find his original email or any of the follow-ups. There were none in their sent folder, either apparently, but they assumed it was just a glitch. Well, whatever. The important thing was that I could actually sleep, not a single dream in sight. Until 3 years later. It was the night of my 10th birthday. I got into bed for what was bound to be another peaceful night, and about 20 minutes later, I drifted off. But I dreamt. For the first time in 3 years, I dreamt. It wasn't a nightmare, but it was very, very realistic. I don't remember much of the dream. I never do. When I woke the day after, all I remembered was seeing my dad dressed in a suit. We were outside and he was crying softly. His face illuminated by the rays of the setting sun, piercing the branches sprouting from a large horse chestnut tree beside him. It confused me. Not the dream itself, but the fact that I had a dream. The first time I could ever remember having a dream and not waking up screaming. I began to worry that whatever had been done was wearing off or something. I wanted to tell them something, but then a small voice in the back of my head told me not to. I had a gift and they wouldn't understand. If it happened again that night, I would tell them. But it didn't. That night, nothing. I slept the sleep of the dead and carried on doing so for a long time after. No dreams once again. 1 month later, my mom was involved in a 3-car pileup and pronounced dead at the scene. I don't really remember the funeral or any of the preparations. I think when you're so young and full of so much grief, the brain tends to shut off. Even looking back now, it's hard to picture it. I do remember as they lowered her into the ground though. That's something that I can never forget. It was so peaceful in the graveyard, seeing the dying sun's rays reflecting off the polished mahogany coffin. I didn't go back for a long time. My dad did, but I couldn't. When I finally did, nearly a year later, it was mid-autumn and I walked through the yellow and orange carpet of leaves alongside my dad, their soft crunch cutting through the silence. I stared at the grave for a long time, still full of sadness. Just before leaving, I saw something lying on the floor. It was a conker, its shiny brown surface perfect against the surrounding discarded foliage. I used to collect these when I was younger and give them all to my mom. I picked it up and I put it on top of the grave. I dreamt again since then, but I never remembered any details of any significance. And then I did, and I was 16. My exams approaching in the summer, and like every single one of my classmates, I was stressed out. I remember falling into bed, tired out after spending the evening studying. That night, I dreamt again. I was tearing open the official-looking envelope with my name on it, and I pulled out a sheet of paper. It showed a list of A's intersected with the occasional B and one C. I heard myself cry out in surprise and joy, and then I saw my dad hug me. I awoke the morning after, feeling bitter when I realized that it had just been a dream, and in reality, my exams weren't for another month. I should add at this point that I'd almost entirely forgotten about my last dream, and I'd never really given enough thought to make a link between that dream and what followed. This dream was different. The surprise I felt 2.5 months later on results day, as I opened that envelope and saw a list of A's intersected with the occasional B and one C. My first thought as my dad hugged me was that there's no way that it could be a coincidence. But then again, if it wasn't a coincidence, then that meant that I must be a prophet or something, which I mean, come on, like, that was the case. I just pushed it to the back of my mind and spent the rest of the day celebrating with my friends. My life carried on as normal for the longest time. I went on to study law at university eventually. I ended up dropping out after a year, unable to cope with the pressure. I would occasionally dream, but still, nothing I really remembered and never any nightmares. By 20, I was in a happy relationship with a girl named Lucy. She was a student and we got a small house together. I had a job as a builder working for the most prestigious company in the area. Life was good. And then it all went wrong. I had a nightmare. Not like the ones that I used to have. I didn't wake up screaming and soaked. All I could remember was seeing myself holding a knife covered in blood. And when I looked down, there was Lucy, gasping for air that would never reach her lungs as blood poured from the large gash in her throat. Suffice to say, I was scared, but so what? It was a nightmare. My first for 13 years, granted, but still, it didn't mean anything. I forced it from my mind and life, and I carried on as normal. 3 months later, I had just got back from work, exhausted. We had started working on a new shopping center in the city outskirts, and despite spending hours pouring the cement foundation, we were less than halfway done. Still, Tuesday night was pizza night, and I was hungry, so I went inside and greeted Lucy, all of it, the same as always. However, as I went to order the pizza, my phone ran out of battery halfway through. I cursed and called through to the kitchen where Lucy was putting away the day's shopping, asking to use her phone, and she said that it was fine. However, as I unlocked it, something caught my eye just before I had opened the app. Lucy and I had been together for a while now, and we were happy, I thought. So why would she have a Tinder? I know that I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. I shouldn't have scrolled through it, but I did. So, suffice to say, when I bursted into the kitchen holding her phone, I wasn't happy. The argument lasted a long time, as you would expect. I don't know how, but she was twisting it to seem like I was in the wrong, as if she had the right. I don't remember grabbing the knife from the holder. My mind was full of rage. But I do remember the look of fear in her eyes before I swung it. I remember looking at the bloody knife in my hand, and then down at her, trying to breathe despite the red smile across her neck. She was dead 2 minutes later. 20 minutes later, it hit me. I had just killed someone. I was going to go to prison for the rest of my life. No, she had it coming. She pushed me towards it, I thought. Yeah, right, stand there and say that to a judge, and they'll let you off scot-free, you idiot. I was on my own here, but I wasn't about to let my life go down the toilet. I thought for a while then that I had an idea. I grabbed the old rug out of the garage and laid it down on the floor next to her. I then grabbed her body and lifted it up onto one end before rolling her up among the fabric. I stood up and examined my hands, now sticky with the liquid that once gave her life. I shook that thought from my head and began to drag the rug towards the garage, opening the car door when I got there and placing her across the back seat. I opened the garage door and climbed into the driver's seat of my Fiesta. I knew where I was going, and it was brilliant. An hour later, I was at the construction site, dragging her body towards the unpoured foundation sections, and then I grabbed a shovel. 2 hours later, I had sweat patches the size of dinner plates under my elbows, and she was beneath a 1 meter thick layer of dirt that would be covered by a thicker layer of concrete 24 hours later. I barely slept that night. Cleaning my kitchen, my car, and the path throughout my house between them took me a very long time, and I had to be thorough. The next morning, after the smell of cleaning chemicals had subsided, I called the police to report a missing persons. I obviously didn't go to work that day. I was talking to a police officer for the first part of the day, and after that, I claimed I was too upset to go to work. which was in fact true. Yes, I had killed Lucy, but I also loved her. I lay there thinking of my colleagues as they would currently be pouring wet concrete over Lucy without the slightest realization when it hit me like a brick. The dream. I had seen her body on the floor, the knife in my hand, all of it before that night. And it had been exactly the same, every detail. This is when I began to think properly. How could I have dreamt this and my exam results before and both of them came to pass? Sure, the exams could be a coincidence, but no, not Lucy. That wasn't possible. And then I made the connection. That dream when I was 10. My mom dying. I saw him. I saw Dad in the graveyard that day, during the funeral. By now, I was panicking. I thought I was going insane. Something was seriously wrong. And what could I do? I couldn't tell anyone. I would be confessing to a murder if I did. And then I heard it. A small voice trying to push through the flood of confusion and anxiety. You have a gift. It was then that I began to wonder. Maybe this was all a big messed up coincidence. Maybe not. I couldn't control it. But if I really could see the future in my dreams, I would at least own it. After all, it was that or prison. An easy choice in my eyes. I carried on living my life. Of course, there is a whole missing persons case built around Lucy. I saw a suspect obviously, but they couldn't find any evidence tying it to me. They never found the body obviously. That sat under meters of concrete. There's no chance of anyone finding it. Life was hard, but I adapted. It's now been just over a year since Lucy. I haven't had a dream since. Until last night. I was stood in the middle of the street, the same one that I live on. I could see a poster for the by-election next month hanging from the lamppost, but that was about as far as these similarities went. The sky was a burnt, angry-looking orange. There were no birds, no planes, nothing. I was surrounded by total silence. The houses themselves were either burnt out or in piles of rubble, completely destroyed. There was a pushchair just ahead of me, blackened and burned. The body lying behind it was curled up, hands appearing to cover its eyes. I say because the skin was so badly blistered and blackened, it was impossible to work out the gender. It was the same story for those strewn up along the road. I didn't have the stomach to look at the contents of the pushchair. What did catch my attention gave me an answer, sort of. The paper lying abandoned in the road. The headline telling the abandoned street that a war had started. That was what I was left with in the morning when I woke up. And I know what it means. What I saw last night terrifies me, and I know that it's coming for all of us. I have a gift, and I'm using this gift to warn everyone else. Will this be taken seriously? It's unlikely. Can it be avoided? I hope so. I'm sharing this in the hope that it can, before we're destroyed. I won't know. In sharing this, I'm sharing my confession. I will have taken my own life before the police trace this back to me. Before the events I saw unfurl. I honestly hope that this is taken seriously, and the human race can fix itself before it's destroyed. He said that I have a gift, but he was wrong. It's a curse.